All right, so my name is Amanda McCarty. I know many, but not all of you. I am the director of NOAA's Climate Ready Nation Initiative, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that initiative, as well as one of the key flagship programs, the Industry Proving Grounds that we have going at NOAA that's of high relevance to this group's work. So Megan, next slide. So if you haven't heard about our agency's Climate Ready Nation Initiative, our goal is to create support a thriving nation whose prosperity, health, security, and growth benefit from and depend upon, the ability to understand and act to reduce the impacts of climate change. This cuts across the full spectrum of what we're doing. So we're advancing both our climate science and our climate services. We're making sure that we provide better and more equitable access to the climate data, products, and information we produce. And that we're also working with partners to empower and support meaningful action on the ground. So next slide. We at NOAA, for those of you who don't know the agency well, we do pretty much everything when it comes to climate. We try to do the science to understand it, observations, data and information stewardship, research and development, modeling, prediction and projection. Then we also shift into the service space where we're co-developing and engaging with users to understand their needs, produce these services, deliver them, provide decision support tools, build capacity, evaluate how we're doing, and turn it around. I wanted to provide this sort of background context because it reflects how we're showing up in this partnership with the American Society of Civil Engineers. Next slide. So when we look at climate solutions, we really want to move from understanding to knowledge and information into mainstreaming adaptation into the work people are doing, trying to meet people where they're at and working to extend our reach. And so this is where we're eager to work through this partnership to do all of these things. Next slide. We kind of have three pillars of the way that we're approaching this from a user perspective. First, we need to be working with communities. Communities, you can't have a climate ready nation without climate ready communities. And so we have partnerships with groups like the Climate Mayors. We're investing in local community efforts. We're investing in workforce development, everything we can do to try and work down at that community level to help people be ready to use information, to understand their risks and make better decisions and take action in the face of climate change. Next slide. We also recognize that our security is dependent upon whether or not we manage climate impacts and manage climate itself. Of course, we think of national and homeland security with this, but we also think of things like food, water, and energy security. And so that's another key pillar to the way that we're approaching our work. Next slide. And then sort of the third leg of the stool is the economics, right? We are recognizing the widespread impacts that climate is having and can have on our economy, but also at sectors of the economy. And so we're investing in efforts to try and help improve different sectors, as well as understanding the risks across sectors so that we can get in the way of them and prevent them from happening. All of this, the communities, the security, and the economy are highly dependent on infrastructure that is prepared for and resilient to climate impacts. So that's where you really all fit into every single thing we're doing. I can't say that to every partner we work with, but this group is really critical to our success in every area because a climate ready nation depends on climate ready infrastructure. Okay, so next slide. So partnerships are absolutely key. We're bringing together, a diversity of partners to move things forward because we really need to co-develop these services. Next slide. And one of the things we wanted to flag for you in light of this is that we are establishing a federal advisory committee, a climate service advisory committee. We're soliciting nominations through December 20th. So please, we ask you to get out to your networks with those ideas of people who could work on climate security, climate economy, climate communities, infrastructure to help us move forward. So I wanted to give, a bit of background on the wide approach we're taking, and then ask my colleague, Allison Crimmins, who's our new director of the Industry Proving Grounds, to come in and talk about how this initiative, which is very closely tied to the work we're doing here, fits into this broader perspective. But I did see, it looked like there was a question in the chat. I don't know, Megan, do you want me to hold these till the end or you want me to do a pause here?
It's up to you. And Jennifer, yes, we will add that link to the chat. That's what I was trying to do in it for instead. Did the next slide. So happy to do that. The other question was about the economic studies. So your call, Amanda and Allison, if y'all want to take the economic one now or later.
Why don't I have, why don't we have Allison come in, because she's going to give you a little bit of the background on some of the specific tools. Well, actually, let me tell you at a high level what we're doing on economic studies. Megan, do you mind going back three slides, I think? The one that's
Okay.
economics, because you can actually sort of see some of the early products here. So if you look at this, we worked with the interagency to do a couple things. First of all, we looked at how we could improve the information that is out there. We have a lot of data, turning that data into information that people can use to make environment and economic linked decisions. And so there's a White House report that you can see in the middle there. These are links that we can get to you, that I can work with Megan to get to you. We've also looked at how climate change impacts and potential responses to it could impact the overall budgets and the way that money flows, because it's not just how could the economy collapse or how do we make decisions, it's how do we direct resources so they're the most effective. We've hosted some roundtables looking at macroeconomic risks and how climate and other priority risks intersect. We have a member of our team, Kevin, who's come on board, and he's doing right now an assessment of climate and housing security risks, looking at the two of them together. And so he's pulling a lot of data about critical infrastructure, housing data, and merging that in with our understanding of physical climate risks to see where housing risks, housing instability, and climate risks could intersect to cause higher levels of instability or higher levels of risk. We're hoping that over time we can develop more assessments like this in different areas. And so that's the type of work we're doing. Some of this really high level sort of information and interagency coordination, some of these really high level discussions to start steering us in the right direction, and then some assessments. And then that federal advisory committee that we are standing up, we're hoping to bring in expertise in this area so that we can continue to further the work. And there's plenty of links we could give to you about things that are out there. And so, John, happy to either do that or have a follow-up conversation on that.
Thank you.
And then we'll get you a link in the chat as well. All right. Any other quick questions? Otherwise, I can turn it over to Allison.
Just acknowledging that the Federal Register request for the advisory committee is actually already in the chat. So folks, that's what that link was.
Oh, thank you, Megan. You're always ahead of me. All right. I will pass it over.
Amanda, you.
Sorry. Allison's new to NOAA. She started just a little bit ago, but she's hit the ground running as the executive director of the Industry Proving Grounds. Prior to coming to NOAA, Allison served as the director of the National Climate Assessment and then had a long career at EPA. Prior to that, working on environmental health issues. But she can add to her introduction, but we couldn't be more excited to have her leading this important initiative. So over to you, Allison.
Thanks, Amanda. You can go to the next slide. I think you already introduced me, but my email address is there if you need to look back at that. I'm very excited to be at NOAA and really excited to be leading this project, which I think is really innovative and also results in very tangible, usable products at the end, which I always like to see. So I'm very happy to be here. If you would go to the next slide, please. Hopefully this is a little bit of review for most of you. There we go. That the mission of the Industry Proving Ground, or IPG, is to connect industries to NOAA's amazing data and products and services, all in that same vein of what Amanda was speaking about in terms of building a climate resilient nation. And we are working with three sectors, architects and engineering, reinsurance, and retail, and really thinking about how we can provide NOAA's data or reformat it or create a new tool that helps help these industry sectors make informed decisions about the risks that they're facing. And I'm really interested in this work, and not just sort of getting to the end and someone saying, yep, we used your data, but really thinking about how we can go, how we can tell the story of how people like you used these tools and outputs to make a decision about the risks you're facing, and then how that led to a different outcome or an economic benefit or an increase in resiliency. So really trying to tell that whole story from beginning to end. Next slide, please. Thank you. There has been a long history of a strong relationship between NOAA and ASCE, going back a long ways, and larger to the architecture and engineering sector, probably a decade or two. I think I saw Ben D'Angelo on this call, so much of that is thanks to him. Most recently, we kicked off the IPG work a couple years ago, back in 2022, with some listening sessions that were followed up by conferences and workshops, and then an MOU signed between NOAA and ASCE. We've also developed a architecture and engineering working group. There was just an engagement meeting with that group last week where Russ Vos, who is leading that sector, was working with that working group to get some input on what projects are top priority and what features might be most useful within those potential projects. I know Russ spoke to all of you in your IPG, spoke to all of you about IPG in your summer workshop, and gave you kind of the big picture and aspirational look into the program. So I'm going to try not to repeat all those things that Russ said last summer, but I thought I'd try to give you a few more specifics about some example projects that are underway. Next slide, please. So as the NOAA contracting team, which is led by Riverside, as they've come on board and they've really been ramping up, we've broken out that work into 3 different work streams. And maybe this is because I have holiday shopping in mind, but I looked at these 3 work streams and I thought, okay, the first one is the storefront, the website development. The second one is the back room, the data ingestion and formatting. And then the third work stream is the products, or what's in the store itself. So the product development. And I've got a few examples within each of these bins on some of the progress that we've made here. So if you'll go to the next slide, work stream 1, that front of the store, this is really thinking about user experience and how people like you might be navigating the website to find the information that you need. So we do have our climate industry website up and running. It's got several different blogs and stories on it. A story map, I think on $1 Billion Events, is coming out in a week or 2. So that page is starting to be populated. And then if you look along the bottom of that image there are also 3 sector pages that are in development and will be coming soon. So that page will be for you and will be populated with the things that the A&E working group help us determine are the most useful to the sector. Next slide, please. We'll move to work stream 2. This is what I think of as the back of the store, kind of behind the curtain coding updates. These are some of the things that don't necessarily lend themselves to really flashy demos, but they're the absolutely critical infrastructure work of translating the data into different formats to increase accessibility and usability. And what I think is exciting here is that many of these modernization steps and improvements will benefit all of the IPG projects and many other programs across NOAA. And it's something that will continue to provide benefits beyond the end of the period of performance for IPG. We're really learning as we're going with many of these projects because they're some of the first out the door. So we're establishing some of our operating procedures, which will help some of the later projects move along a little faster. Next slide, please. I have just a couple of examples in this work stream 2. There's a couple of the projects here that have milestones coming up within the next 3 months, including Weather Coder, which is getting ready to deploy pretty soon. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, this slide and the next one are kind of a big table that's showing a long list of some of the projects that have been identified by the different sectors and have risen towards the top of our priority list here. Just because there is a blue box within one sector does not mean that it won't be useful to all three sectors. In fact, I think a lot of these projects will. But it's just those that were kind of identified as top priority. You can go to the next slide, Megan, please. So you can see there's several projects, of course, for the architecture and engineering sector, but many projects that really benefit all three. And if you'll go to the next slide, there's a list here of some of the ones from that architecture and engineering sector that are kind of higher up on the priority list. And these are a mix of projects that are underway, that maybe are being scoped or discussed with the engagement groups, or maybe have not yet even started yet. So the ones that I've highlighted in blue, I've got a couple of slides for each of those. The first one is underway. The second one is in the scoping mode, and the third one's not yet started yet. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor of those. So next slide, please. The project here is Typical Meteorological Year, or TMY, and this is in progress. This is an interface that will pull together a typical month-to-month record using many years of data. And it's something that is looking at both historical records and future climate projections. This includes multiple data sets, including the National Solar Radiation Database, GHCN. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, there's a nice explanation here of how this is done. So taking those many records, many years of data, and then pulling from that, all of the Junes, and thinking about if June 1989 was the most typical month for rainfall, then the June in that year will be from June 1989. This project is starting with the historical as sort of the prototype, but will move into the projections out to 2099, and allows people to ask questions about what is the typical amount of sunlight that a building might receive in a specific county, or once we have the projections, what is the typical amount of rainfall in September in a specific flood zone in 2050. So this one is, of the three that I'm showing, a little bit further along, and we've been working with the working group to get feedback on this. Next slide, please. The next two I'll go through fairly quickly, Megan, because there's not too much more to be said about them. This is wind climatology, which was a top priority from this sector, looking at straight line winds, derechos, impacts to wildfires, and including offshore wind power. This is a very new product. It is historical only, and it is pretty early in the development and scoping. There's a lot of research that's still going into how to add wind climatology to our products. But we've been talking to the working group already and seeking some more engagement as we developed this project, since it is a pretty high priority one. And I think it's one that also is a very high resolution. I think it's 10 kilometers, if I'm remembering right. And then the next slide is an example of a project that is not yet started, but I think has a lot of potential. These are temperature, intensity, duration, frequency curves, or IDF curves. So this would also be both historical and projected future temperature IDF curves. Obviously, this has a lot of relevance to ASCE crowd and to thinking about building codes, but I think it's also one that has a lot of relevance to the public health community, thinking about what sort of length of heat waves or intensity of heat waves in the future that we might be expecting. And I think next slide might be, oh no, I have two more. This is a list of some of the earliest projects. I talked about a couple of these, including the websites and TMY. From the other sectors, we have been working on the $1 billion disasters program, and including the disasters that were below $1 billion, so sub-$1 billion disasters into that dashboard, as well as storm events and climate projection services. So a couple of other projects that are coming out that might have been ranked high in the other sectors, but I think have a lot of relevance to ASCE as well. And then my last slide is just to end on a little bit of hopefulness for the legacy of this program. This is an IRA funded program that the period of performance ends in 2026. But I think it's a program that really establishes NOAA and our relationship for success moving forward, because a lot of these products are going to continue to provide benefits well beyond 2026. And hopefully, because they are being co-designed with these working groups from the different industry sectors, they will hopefully be immediately useful and usable for years to come. And once they are public, I'm also hoping we can really expand our engagement even broader than these three sectors to help everyone take advantage of these products. So I will stop there and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Allison. We actually already have one in the chat. Sorry, Dan.
Go ahead, Megan.
Okay, apologies. Terry McAllister asked about how are the typical values defined for any average values and variance are needed.
I don't know the answer to that, Terry. Unfortunately, I don't know how the variance is being recorded in that, but I can find out and get back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. Sorry, that would be great. And I just say that because you're doing such great work in pulling all this data together, but for codes and standards, which is the area that I'm thinking about in particular, we need to be able to get to the upper end of the distribution or the lower end, depending on what it is that we're looking at.
Thanks. I will definitely send you an answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Terry, just real quickly, if I can ask a follow-up, are you referring specifically to the temperature product, or I want to make sure I understand where you were talking about?
There was a slide, I thought, of a whole range of typical values, including wind. It might have been temperature, but it wasn't just temperature unless
No. That's fine.
Rainfall, right? Yeah. And, for the rainfall, it's always important to know which measure is being used. If it's the 24-hour, 1 hour, engineers want 15 minutes, some want an hour. It just depends on the application.
Right, exactly.
This is good feedback actually already, because this work is still in kind of the verifying and validating stage. So getting that kind of understanding of what would be most useful is very helpful.
Right, and I know Rebecca has her hand up, but I guess I could envision maybe some follow-up discussions on some of these products, because what I'm seeing is obviously NCEI has historically provided observational based products. Part of this IPG is to transition to where they're also developing projection-based products. Most of us on this call from ASCE, because we're interested in codes and standards, are really interested in future conditions. So we tend to be a little bit more focused on the projection-based data sets. But I think the understanding who's using these products now, this came up on the IPG advisory call, who's using these products now would help us understand maybe even our own community a little bit better. Because if we're going to advocate for future conditions as parts of our standard codes and standards, we have to understand how our engineering colleagues are using the current products. So I guess all I'm saying here is I think we need a little bit of, or should strive for a little bit of two-way information flow about like who's using your products now, What do they think they're getting out of them? What are they interested in projections? I just think we can share more information, and that's going to help us be more helpful to you. So that was kind of a long, complicated way of saying I think this stuff is great, and I expect there to be some follow-up. Rebecca, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Allison, it's great to see you and see this work coming out of NOAA. DOT's got a lot of collaborations with NOAA, but I also wanted to check in, as you said, how you're connecting with others in industry, because I'm thinking we've got studies now on coastal airports, for example, like how long certain areas might be inundated and how soon certain areas of those structures could be usable after flooding. I mean, there's some really interesting areas where, as you said, once we go to these extremes, where are we finding we don't want these systems to fail on the ground, but we want to be able to test those scenarios at many of our facilities. And so, as you mentioned, some of the proving grounds, how are you connecting with those types of facilities, or is there a better point of contact that we can share within our agencies and with some of our collaborators and partners?
Right now, as we're developing it, we're pretty focused on those three sectors of retail, insurance, reinsurance, finance, and then architects and engineers. And so those are the folks we've had listening sessions with and workshops and roundtables, and they've helped us pull together working groups for each of those three sectors with kind of a smaller number of people from those sectors who are willing to help, put in a lot of regular work as we're co-developing these products. And then I think when it gets to a stage of being ready to, let out into the wider world, or at least beta testing, that's when I would really like to lean on folks like you and Amanda and others to think about the sort of broader circle of people that should be made aware of these tools, and hopefully we'll be using them as well. So I think since many of these projects are coming out kind of, they're not all coming out at once. They're kind of between now and September of 2026, they'll be rolling out as they're ready. So we'll have to kind of keep attuned to what might be most useful to which communities and try to tailor engagement like that.
Great. Thank you. Exciting work.
Thank you. I've got one more question. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. But Amanda, I'm going to go back to some of those economic studies that you were talking about early on. There was a CBO report, the White House National Strategy, the roundtable from NASA. All of those, I think, are basically taking a macroeconomic approach to it. And I just wanted to, I guess, ask the question, a lot of at least my understanding of the resistance that we get to adoption of hazard-based building codes, and even by extension, even incorporating future climate into ASCE standards, a lot of that pushback really comes out of the construction industry, the builders who see this as additional cost. And so unless that benefit is measured more at the project scale, and this is, I think, is where Dennis can help us here in a few minutes understand this process a little better. Unless we can incentivize the builders to be willing to create a product that might cost more, we're going to continue to get pushback, I think, on the adoption of hazard-based building codes and climate-informed standards. And so, what do you think is the potential? The one comment I will make about going into the next administration is, based on my experience and your experience and others' experience, federally driven programs and initiatives are probably not going to be the approach that's taken to the same degree that it was during the last administration. So, what's the potential to begin to look at this more at a micro scale, where we can really understand where these benefits accrue and try to incentivize people that are resistant now at a state and local level? Have you given that any thought, or has anybody else here? I mean, we've got a great cast of people here from the federal family. do we need to kind of change the approach we're taking to making the business case for these codes and standards? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, it's a great question or a great series of comments, and I'm sure others have ideas on it too. So please come in. But what I'll say is that I agree 100%. We, you know, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it felt like people weren't paying attention to understanding that there were actual economic benefits and costs to this. It felt so far in the future. So economic discounting sort of took over, and now we're seeing these things happen over and over. We're seeing insurance start to, you know, be more costly or not exist in some places. And so the reality of how the built environment and physical risks are interacting is becoming a reality, not a hypothetical. I think, you know, you're right that we focused a lot, those reports focus a lot at the macroeconomic level, and that's because, you know, that's a place where big shifts can happen, right? Like big realizations and big shifts can happen. But when you get down to actually making a lot of change, you need to really often go sector by sector or state by state or community by community, because that's where the actions take place. The tension between sort of building and operations and building and longevity of infrastructure is going to continue to just be a tension based on the system that exists. And so there's been some great work. You know, we've seen multiple reports come out about the return on investment of good climate information and early warnings and, you know, better, higher quality infrastructure. And we need to take a more systematic approach to the way that we build infrastructure. You know, great that your building stands, but if the roads and energy and water and waste infrastructure around it collapses, is it really worth much, right? These are all the sort of big picture questions that either communities need to be grappling with or entire sectors need to be grappling with. You know, we started with housing as like a pilot study for some of this, you know, risk-based economic assessment work. Our hope is we can bring it out in other areas. So if this is something that we would want to tackle around infrastructure more broadly, or around specific sectors of this, or how we build infrastructure, or how we retrofit infrastructure, and looking at the incentives and, you know, the carrots and the sticks in this space, you know, those are conversations that we're very eager to have. We think we have a lot of data and information. NOAA sits within the Department of Commerce. As a result, we think a lot about the economics of things. We're trying to even expand upon that. We have our NIST colleagues on, but then think about the broader federal family that's on this call, and agencies that aren't on this call. So there's a lot the federal government can do, but in this space, I don't think we can do it alone. I think we need, you know, builders, operators, the architects, everybody sitting at the table to weave together a more cohesive approach to the sort of upfront cost versus long-term operational cost versus, you know, it's not all just money. It's like if the hospital fails and people are sick, you can't put a price on that. So long-winded response, and happy to have others jump in, but yes, I agree with everything.